So, how do you make a game like Grow Garden 2 and Roblox Studio? And last time we were already having a look at how you can create a new experience inside Roblox Studio and kind of do the basic setup and adjust the most important settings. So this time, let's discuss how we can create a simple Grow Garden 2-like map, similar to the one you can see with the base game. So now, let's switch right over to Roblox Studio. So we're inside Roblox Studio now, inside this very experience we created last time. And you can likely find the playlist at the top right and also in the description. But essentially what we did is create this empty experience and also the experience settings. We made sure to essentially change this setting for the remainder of this series. And we also went over some settings that might come in handy later down the line on the Creator Hub. But now, as we saw, Grow Garden 2 has this kind of circular layout. So I guess let's start with this cylinder ground. And there are a bunch of ways to do that. For instance, there are cylinders for that in the toolbox, having this kind of stud aesthetic, but they're oftentimes curved in some weird way, and the texture doesn't really work. So what I figured is the best way of handling this is by expanding workspace and then selecting this base plate. And then down here we can change the shape from block to cylinder, like this, and rotate it by pressing 4 on the keyboard. Or up here, you can also enable grid snapping and set it to, for instance, 5 degrees, so now we can rotate it by 90 degrees, like this. You can see my Grow Garden 2-like template you can find in the description. I can kind of went with the stud logic, and when it comes to the dimensions I chose for this ground, so here inside size, I went with 10, and then 400 on the X and the Z, I guess from our perspective. And Roblox will just use, I think, whatever the minimum value of those two is. And now let's say you don't want this stud aesthetic and want to go with the one from the original, the base plate already had. Then you can just change the texture's face to, well, let's figure it out, perhaps left. Okay, so right it was, like so. With the difference between textures and decals, for instance, being the one that textures automatically repeat their graphic until this entire, I guess, boundary box's face is covered. And if you like, you can also overlay another color. For instance, let's say I like this type of green, and then when it comes to the base plate itself, we can change the brick color up here to a different kind of green, like so. And I think I want to make this even darker, like this. And if you want to keep track of everything, you can also rename this to, like by pressing enter or changing the respective attribute, rename this to ground, for instance, and also put it into a new folder. My template, I called this map, but I used a capital letter, like this. Yeah, and then you can preferably move this down here to touch the ground, or even inside the ground you can enable grid snapping up here. You can also make it transparent, like so. And if you like, you can also remove or hide the decal too, which you can do here. I think the original Grow Garden 2 doesn't do this, but if you like, you can also add another cylinder, like for this, if you want to have this kind of island vibe to it for the sand and also this sea. So I guess you would just select the ground and press Shift and D in order to Control and D in order to duplicate it, move it slightly below, and then let's say you want to set this to 500 on the X and the Y, or Y and Z, but we kind of rotated it. So I guess X and Z from our perspective. And then you can do whatever you like. You can set this to yellow, this one too, like so, or whatever your preference might be. Also rename it. If you don't like the way this standard skybox is looking, you can remove it like by expanding lighting, the lighting service, and removing the sky. So then it looks like this, which I guess makes this the true default one, I guess. And now inside the toolbox you can open up here, you can essentially look up sky and go with whatever one you like, or also keep this one, whatever your preference might be. Let's say I like this one, not sure if it's the one I was using my template by, I guess, Xword. Oh, and as you can see, this one also contains its very own bloom, blur, and so on. So post-processing, I guess. So you can remove those if applicable, and drag them in here to keep it clean. And my template, I also kind of added this cylinder, so it can serve as a hitbox when it comes to stealing crops. So you have a level playing field, because this one's distance to all of the plots is the same, as opposed to if people had to bring their stolen items to either one of those shops. So we can do it the same way here. My preference is kind of to have those functional objects directly inside workspace, as long as it's not too many. So I guess let's rename this to sell stolen item hitbox or whatever, and go with 50, 80, 80 here. Kind of slightly reposition it if you like. And then you can also remove its texture and make it transparent, prevent it from casting a shadow. And disable can collide, so we can actually enter it and make sure anchored is set to true. But I will likely go over this again when the time comes. Not sure if you noticed, but I also had this kind of red circle to indicate it, like the central hub and also the kind of hitbox. So if you like, you can also look up circle, and I think I was using the one by lighting. I'll drag it in here. And then let's say I want to go with 10 on the X, and then I guess 100 for both the Y and the Z, like so, with it slightly lower. And then, like with my example, you can make this thing red, so you will have to enable use part color down here. You can also copy this texture by pressing Ctrl and C, and then by pressing Ctrl Shift and V, you can also put it in here. You might have to change the face again though, which is because I parented to the wrong object. Okay, let's try now. Okay, so left it as this time, and change its color 3 again. And you know the reason why it's called like this is because it allows you to pick any values inside this range, as opposed to only this limited set of brick colors, like you sometimes have in Roblox Studio. And we need to make sure anchored is enabled again, so players aren't able to kick the thing around the map, or it won't pop up, like out of this ground, because you know, strictly speaking, it kind of overlaps all the way, like in this lower section. But now let's look up shop, for instance. You can also set it to 3D beforehand to set a filter, and you can likely tell this is my favorite one, so like, let's drag it in here again. Make sure to disable scripts in case it contains any. You can also like try to identify them in here, and then we can press 4 again, rotate the thing the way we want. You can also make it bigger or smaller, whatever preference you have essentially. For instance, let's say I want to use 0.8, or what about this one, for instance, by Kubo the Pog. Let's put it here. So I guess this thing here is the NPC then. You know, sometimes people don't know you can disable the name tag inside the humanoid object, so they just default to you know, setting the parent name to blank essentially. Let's make sure this one doesn't contain any scripts either. And we also need to make sure, at least when it comes to non-humanoids, all of their parts are anchored. So in case this is set to false for any of those, you will see the object falling apart at runtime, which we can also test by setting this to test here, like in case you're dealing with a larger map in general, and essentially see what happens. In this case, I think this guy might have somewhat fallen over, but I don't mind. But yeah, that's looking good now. And yeah, I don't mind those lighting effects. This is essentially what those components here do. So let's say let's see what happens if I set this to disabled. So you can tell now it's a little more moderate. Well, let's be patient actually, because you know, sometimes that's what's loaded last. But I think that's what did the trick here. And obviously I won't be going into those interactive elements like proximity prompts for those shop this time around, but we'll do in the future episodes. So my creator store model, you can also see I added those palm trees, for instance. There you go, and also those props in the background. So I guess sky's the limit as always. Speaking of limits though, what happens if we start all the way at the edge? So now as you can see, players are just able to jump down here, which is likely not what you want. So one very easy way to tackle this would be to select the circle again. I think I also want to parent it below the map folder. Duplicate it using Ctrl and D again. And then if I set this to 80, those two to 470 for instance, you can see it roughly aligns with my green ground cylinder proud. Might also be a good time to center those objects, so I can do the same thing here. And yeah, now we can essentially remove the texture again, make it invisible unless your preference tells you otherwise. And again, we need to make sure can collide is enabled as well as anchored. But now what is this all of a sudden? Well, let's have a look. So Roblox has different settings when it comes to the accuracy or fidelity of collisions, like in order to save on performance. But if you set this from box to default, it should already do the trick. So this time around I'm not sitting on this kind of invisible roof, and also I'm not able to leave the map anymore. You know, of course, unless I add flying or anything like it to my game. Good. So however, one more thing I deem relatively essential being those player plots. So let's have a quick look at how we can add those as well. So if we want to keep this really simple, let's just add a new folder and name it plot so we can use it in the next episode. And then let's just insert a new part here, like this. You can also go with a start part from the toolbox if you like, drag it in. I think I want to rename mine to floor and put it into a new folder. I'll call 1 now because it's the first player plot, and parent it below plots. Now let's say I want to use this as my size, and you can keep its orientation like this, like the original if you like. To be honest, I kind of prefer this configuration. You can also go with a model here instead if you would like to move this at runtime. If not, I guess let's move this to 0 and negative 130 here for instance, and change its brick color to perhaps a slightly lighter green, like lime green. And then we can again add fences to it, like I did in my template. You can also add a new sign to it. So let's say like this one from the toolbox by Serverboy. Drag it in here and change its relative position and orientation the way you like. So this time I'm lucky again, or it depends on how you look at it, because I think it's the one I was using with the Grow Garden 1 tutorial, like inspired tutorial. You can also find below my channel. So because of this quote-unquote luck, I already got this text lab in here, but you can also quickly add this yourself. If it doesn't show up again, it might be because of the face attribute. And yeah, I think this time we need to make sure to, yeah, there you go, make sure an anchored is enabled for all of its parts. Let's give this another quick test. There you go. Everything remaining rock solid, I guess. So one last thing we need to do is to kind of copy this over, so we end up actually having 8 of those player plots. And the easiest way you can do this by just duplicating your folder or model, rotating this by 180 degrees, and inverting its I think X position. So from I think 130 we were having this time to negative 130. So I guess let's do plus 260 here. Again, if you're using a model, you can also change its primary part directly, which will likely just be its floor parts position, and will restore those relative positions and orientations. But now the beautiful thing is we can just select all of those by holding shift and duplicate them again, and then now we can rotate them by 90 degrees, and we'll use the center of mass as pivot, meaning we can easily do the same thing again and it will align perfectly. There you go. But obviously you can also have those kind of wider plots, up to you essentially. Not sure why, maybe because the original game's map is a bit larger, but I honestly prefer this variant over the wider ones. And we can also rename those. Alright, there you have it guys. So this is how you can essentially set up your Go Garden 2 like map inside Roblox Studio. Meaning, obviously, we're now able to focus on for instance, the plot system in the next video. As always, please feel free to reach out if you have any questions. And yeah, see you then, take care.